So my ex, she has a daughter that she never told me about. Well, guess what? That daughter is mine. So I invited them into my house with my wife, my children, just trying to get to know her. But little did I know she was sent to absolutely break my world apart. Guys, I'm going to start from the beginning because this is a pretty crazy story. I've heard that it's normal for siblings to fight sometimes, but normal doesn't feel like the word for many situations by a long shot. Back in college, I, 36 male, was in a committed relationship with Roxie. Unfortunately, we realized our senior year that our relationship was on a timer. I was planning to stay on the West Coast while fulfilling my LCSW requirements. I'd gotten into a decent master's program with a reputation for helping graduates get the connections they need to start their clinical supervision. Originally, Roxie was planning on staying in the area as well and just taking up a job with a graphic design firm, where she's been interning, but with her mom getting sick, it started looking more and more like she'd be moving back to Puerto Rico after undergrad to be there for her family. Realizing that we had an expiration date was hard. I fell into a pit of depression and started drinking really heavy, to the point where I would frequently miss class. For a time, it started to look doubtful that I'd even be able to finish undergrad and start on my master's degree, and a part of me didn't care. I just did not see the point of working towards a future that did not involve Roxie, which might be why I self-sabotaged as hard as I did. Well, the weeks of finals, I showed up to a particularly wild party having already been drinking, and I wound up spending the night with one of Roxie's friends. The week was not halfway through before Roxie found out about it, and I managed to graduate by the skin of my teeth, but I did so as a single and rather broken man. She rightfully blocked me and never spoke to me again. So, I went through my postgraduate plans as they've been laid out for me, but I was a wreck. Social work felt like a joke of a calling. There was a cruel irony in working towards helping others put their lives back together while being convinced I'd given up on my own last shot at happiness. Thankfully, I was not into my master's program a full year before I met my current wife, Harley. At first, she was just somebody to study with, but the more time that we spent together, the more our spirits were lifted. She finished the program a year before I did and supported me both professionally and emotionally, as I fell back in love with my field of study. By the time I reached my own graduation date, we married. Well, we've now been married for 13 years, guys. We have a beautiful daughter, Rose, and we were blessed with our son, Dewey, just a few months ago. Not everything has been easy. Dewey was not planned, so things have been a little hectic, with Harley being breastfeeding again, while I've had to balance my client work with taking over a lot of general household responsibilities such as cooking and cleaning. But we've been making it work. Our new routine got shaken up, however, about 3 weeks ago when I got a call from an unsaved number I vaguely recognized. The 939 area code, but I could not immediately put my finger on it. When I answered the call, it did not take me long to realize it was Roxie's voice on the other line. She got right to the point and she told me that I had a daughter, Piper, and she told me that my daughter wants to meet me. Well, as it turns out, Roxie had found out about her pregnancy not long after moving back to Puerto Rico. Still angry at me for cheating, she wants to believe that she could get through it without any help. I can only imagine how hard it was to go through pregnancy and childbirth alone. Especially while helping the family take care of her mom. The fact that she never even tried to contact me and ask for child support, it's a sign of how truly angry with Roxie she must have been with me. When Piper was about a year old, Roxie gained a small inheritance from her mom passing, and she worked hard to keep them scrapping by. Roxie was apparently a little over 5 when they moved back to the coast. And in all that time, Roxie chose to keep my memory rather than bother requesting a dime. As Piper grew to be a bit older, she became increasingly curious about who her father was. Roxie discouraged it for a while, but she ultimately decided she would rather call me herself than risk Piper reaching out behind her back. So, I tell Roxie that I was willing to meet Piper, but I need to speak with my wife about everything first. This was an exceptionally hard conversation. Harley is an extremely big person on loyalty, honesty, and open lines of communication. And while I'd always maintained those values in our relationship, learning that I'd violate them so shortly before I met her was a tough pill to swallow. I wound up sleeping in a chair in Dewey's room that night to give Harley some space, but she did agree that meeting Piper was the right thing to do. So I called Roxie to set up a meeting, and I didn't actually see Roxie that day, but she dropped Piper off at my office in between clients and I took her to lunch. I have to say, Roxie did an amazing job. Piper's clearly inherited her mother's gift for design. She showed me pictures of murals and projects that she's done at school. She showed me personal logo ideas that she's worked on so she could start her own freelancing page. I can't say I was half that motivated at her age, but I suppose growing up with only one working parent does help a child learn to become a lot more self-sufficient. We met a few more times after that, and it was typically the same. Roxie would drop her off and pick her up from the office, always without coming in herself, and I would take her to lunch, to a park, to a museum, places we could talk, and she would just catch me up on the life that I've missed. Naturally, she had quite a few questions for me as well, and before long I decided the best way to tell her about my life was to show her. So I invited her to dinner so that she could meet the rest of her extended family. She told me that she'd have to ask her mom, but Roxie called me just later that evening to schedule a dinner date. That dinner date was last night. Piper was a bit nervous when Roxie dropped her off at my place, and thankfully, Harley helped me navigate a long talk with Rose, so that we could explain the situation in a way that she would understand. We obviously left out certain details like the cheating, but we made sure that she understood that Piper was her sister and that getting to know the family she'd missed out on for so long might be a bit hard for her. I was really proud of how well she took it, and she was even excited to have a sister a bit closer to her age. I'd barely even let Piper into the house before Rose ran up to hug her. No small thanks to Rose, Piper started to loosen up over the course of dinner. I was most worried about how she would deal with Harley. Well, I think that she'd still be a bit undecided on that front, and she asked some very polite questions. But I could tell that she was being very, very careful how she said it. Well, she was definitely most at ease when Rose broke back into a conversation. And I was extremely proud of how delicate she was after dinner when I let her hold her baby brother for the first time. It was after dinner that things got really tense. Rose invited Piper to see her room. Meanwhile, I decided to spend some time looking after Dewey so that Harley could rest. I don't know exactly how much time passed before I heard the scream. It could have been 10 minutes, maybe 20. It definitely was not very long. It was quickly followed by shouting, which grew louder as I handed Dewey off to Harley and made my way down the hall. It didn't take 2 seconds after opening the door to see what was going on. When she was about 7, I bought Rose this beautiful rubber wood dollhouse. It's vintage and hardly state-of-the-art, with only 4 stories of about 3 to 4 rooms, and each, has porches on the outside. But it's made in a lovely Victorian style, and Rose has made it something of an ongoing passion project ever since, slowly adding furniture and accessories over the years. It sits on the table in her room, prominently featured amongst her dolls. At least it did. When I opened up the door to the room, however, it was upside down on the floor next to the table. The front panel had popped off, and one of the panels on the side was visibly cracked. Dolls, furnishings, and other accessories littered the floor. So, Piper explained that Rose was showing her how it opens on each side for easy access to the rooms. Piper was trying to open one of each side panel, but it was stuck. She apparently got a little too rough and accidentally joisted it from the table. She was extremely apologetic, but Rose was accusing her of doing it on purpose. I've almost never seen Rose throw a tantrum before, especially at this age. But she was absolutely red in the face, and it took time to just get her to calm enough that she could hear me over the sound of her own crying. I tried to explain that accidents happen and that Piper was sorry. Once she started to calm down, Piper and I helped pick up some of the fallen furniture and other miniatures so that Rose could see most of it was unbroken. I promised Rose that we would take it somewhere to get it fixed, and that we would replace anything that could not be repaired. Eventually, I was able to get her to apologize to Piper for accusing her. Piper was pretty shaken up by the whole thing, but I apologized to her for not just, warning her that Rose was having a lot of antique accessories in her collection that she doesn't usually like people to touch. And I let her know that if Rose wanted to let her play with them at all, then she must think Piper is pretty special. For some reason, though, I kept feeling like she never quite believed me. Her guilt just never quite went away by the time Roxie pulled up to take her home. I want to believe this will all get resolved, but I'm honestly kind of nervous about it. This definitely was not how I wanted Piper first night meeting her new family to go. I'm afraid that if I don't handle things perfectly moving forward, this could make it harder for Piper to ease into the family than it already was. Is there a way to make things easier for everyone? Or am I just overreacting to a normal spat between two sisters? I was never expecting to have 2 kids this age, and I don't know how well I'm doing as having to make the adjustment so suddenly. Update number 1. Hey guys, it's been a couple of weeks since I posted about the meeting of my daughter Piper. And those who expected the situation to get worse have turned out to be right. The first time I saw Piper after she fought with my other daughter at dinner, things were fine. Like most of our one-on-one meetings, we met at my office and went for a walk in the park to talk. None of the nervousness from before seemed to have been left over, and I figured it was all going to pass. So I tried inviting her to another dinner in the hopes that we could get a do-over. She told me that she would call me later to talk about it, but she never did. I assumed that she just needed some time. So I decided not to push the issue. She starts asking to meet more often, which I took as a good sign. More time alone with each other might help her open up, so that she would be comfortable seeing the rest of the family again. As this was happening, Rose was asking questions. She got over the thing with the dollhouse pretty quick, and she wanted to know when she would get to see her new sister again. So I tried to explain to her that these things take time. But Rose took the initiative by asking if we could invite Piper to Rose's softball game that Saturday, and I told her it could not hurt to ask. When I asked Piper, she told me she would think about it, and after she blew off dinner, I figured that meant that she would be not coming. But the day of the game, she called me up and asked if I could pick her up from the mall. Well, I was thrilled that she was ready to start moving on and come to the game. So I dropped Rose off at the field and swung back toward the mall to pick up Piper. I figured I would just pull around the parking lot and she would hop in. So I called her as I got there to see which entrance she was in. She said that she was running late and to meet her at the fountain, so I just parked and went in. The whole thing already felt a bit off, and I don't know, that didn't change when I got inside. She was just sitting there at the fountain waiting for me, and I was confused. I started to ask what she's been doing running late from, but she cut me off and said that she wanted to show me something. She brought me to a shoe store that I'd passed before but had never really gone inside. She was showing me some of the sneakers that they had in there, some of which had some pretty neat designs. Well, there was one particular brand that she said lets you customize your own designs online. She pulled up some pictures on her phone of designs that she made in her free time and that she thought would look cool printed on a pair of shoes. It's not that the idea wasn't interesting. Like I said in my first post, Piper is a really gifted artist. But I was also trying to get Rose's game going. I needed to get there, and I was growing a little impatient. So I told Piper that if this was something we could do online, that'd be better. Then we could talk about it later, but right now we need to go. It wouldn't be fair to say Piper got mad immediately. I'd actually used the same word as I used to describe myself. She was impatient. It was just a different sort of impatience. She did not understand why I was in such a big rush to leave. I told her that the game had started by now and we were running late. That's when she said that she was not going to the game, and it finally clicked in my head, and the people who commented on my first post that I've been overly optimistic were right. I really had not looked at this relationship through Piper's perspective at all. I was in such a rush to make her feel included, I was seeing everything through that lens. But she had never said that she was coming to the game. I just assumed that was her intention when she'd called me. So, instead of making assumptions, I just tried to ask questions. I asked why she would call me to hang out when she knew Rose had a game today. And that's when Piper did get mad. She starts to cry and tells me that it should not matter if Rose has a game, that she got to have me for 12 years and Piper did not. And, well, that missing one afternoon with me was not going to hurt her. If Piper were any of my clients, I would have had no problem explaining to her objectively why this isn't how things work. But looking into those eyes full of pain that I'd caused, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I struggled to hold back my own tears as I explained to her that I was sorry I never learned about her earlier, but that there's nothing I can do about this now. I still have to be a father to Rose, and I still have to help my wife with our newborn baby, especially while he's still breastfeeding. Of course, Piper's welcome to be a part of that whenever she's ready. Until then, I'm happy to give her all the one-on-one time that she wants. But I have to find balance with my other obligations. Then, she went off in a new way, introducing an element to the conversation that I honestly had not considered. She told me that for as much as I seem so concerned with my white family, I had not asked how Piper's mom has been doing the entire time with Piper, and I've been getting to know each other. Well, that was absolutely nothing to do with Roxie being Puerto Rican, of course. Piper's own mixed-race identity was something that has never crossed my mind. I just didn't see her that way. All I saw was a daughter. And I know that's exactly what some people mean when they refer to privilege. The luxury of not having to think about it. Well, that wasn't quite the case here. But it wasn't hard to see where Piper could have perceived it that way from. So I told Piper that she was right. And I promised that I would try to have a one-on-one with Roxie soon, and I asked if she thought that could help, and she quietly said sure. Well, I invited her again to Rose's game, making sure that she knew that Rose would be really excited to see her, but she said that she wanted to just talk to her mom, and that's it. She wants her mom to pick her up. So I hugged her and left, feeling for the second time in a short while that I'd underestimated how difficult getting to know her would truly be. By the time I got to Rose's game, it was nearly over. She's not very happy with me, guys. Harley's not happy with me. Neither of my daughters or their mothers are happy with me, but I do intend to keep my promise to meet with Roxie. Although, frankly, it's not just to see how she's doing. Not that I did not mean my promise to Piper, I just also intended to find out if Piper's been saying anything at home that might hint at how I can resolve this. Update number 2. This won't be a long update, as I promised Piper I set up a meeting with her mom. It was my first time seeing Roxie since college, so I definitely had mixed feelings going in naturally. I was afraid of coming face to face with all the hurt that I've caused her so long ago, but there was some positive emotions too. A part of me was really excited to reconnect with somebody I used to love so deeply. I learned a bit more about what things were like for them in my absence. Roxie wound up giving up on graphic design as her passion was replaced by motherhood. After moving back from Puerto Rico, she took a real estate course and has done moderately well for herself. Things, in the intervening years were hard, but they always made it through. She had not dated much. The distrust I'd left her with had soured her taste on relationships, it would seem. Plus, she took pride in being Piper's mother. She never wanted to feel like she was saddling Piper with a stepfather. As for my difficulties with Piper, Roxie says that Piper hasn't said much at home beyond what she's told me herself. She says that Piper is just acting like a teenager, one who's adjusting to a troubled situation, and she joked that a social worker really should not need that explained, which, touche. The one thing that did surprise me was that Roxie took some of the blame. She said that perhaps going at it alone and not involving me in Piper's childhood might have contributed to the problem. That we'd already be past this if I had met Piper 10 years ago when Roxie first moved back with her. I told her not to dwell on that, and what's done is done. There's little point dealing with any version of the situation other than the one that we're in. In the meantime, Roxie promised that she'd start taking Piper to therapy if our problems continue. She asked me if I had any recommendations, but I told her it was probably best if I not know too much about it. The temptation to ask questions if she goes to someone I know professionally would be too much. Ultimately, it looks like we're on the path towards working things out, and it was a relief that meeting with Roxie went so smooth. There was only one sort of weird moment, and it wasn't until I was leaving. As we were hugging goodbye, she kept one hand on my shoulder and said that she wished I would just stay faithful, that we would not be going through any of this if we had not raised Piper together. Well, she's not wrong. If the moment had lasted any longer, I might have thought that she was making a pass at me. Thankfully, she just let it end as soon as it began. So there really weren't too many lingering doubts. It will be a hard road, but I think that things are going to be okay. Update number 3. My daughter is missing. Following my chat with Roxie, I decided to give Piper a bit of space from the family and focused on hanging out with her alone for a time. For a second, I thought that was going well. The first time I met up with Piper since the mall, she was ecstatic. Meeting with her mom, it really helped smooth over the perception that I favored one side of the family over the other. She just kept telling me how happy Roxie had been to see me. So I immediately saw where that could be problematic, especially given my weird moment with Roxie before. As an act of caution, I made sure Piper knew that nothing was going on with us. She did not seem to fully get the message. She kept telling me how Roxie had not had a man in her life in a while, and she was happy that I was there as a positive influence. Just to make things crystal clear, I again made sure that she knew that I was only there as a co-parent, that I had a wife and I was simply there for Roxie as a friend and Piper's father. There was a fleeting moment in which I could have sworn that she seemed irritated, but she didn't say anything, and I just hoped that I'd simply crossed the line by being a bit more blunt than I needed to be. The moment seemed to pass. A bit later, Piper asked how Rose has been doing. I told her she's doing well and just hinted that she would not mind seeing her half-sister again. Piper seemed to open up to the idea of a family dinner, so we made arrangements for her to come over the following night. That night, however, I saw a new side of Piper that I can't say that I liked. To say that she was a bit pouty would be an understatement. She was downright hostile. She complained about the food, saying the chicken was undercooked, but it wasn't. Anyways, to illustrate her point, she went as far as to touch the food on Harley and Rose's plates. Rose is not big on people touching her food, who is? So that did not go over well. Things quickly got heated, and Piper said Rose was being a baby. She then rubbed it in by saying Rose was too old to be playing with dollhouses. Well, at that moment, Harley quietly told me to intervene, but Piper heard and called Rose a daddy's girl. Rose yelled at Piper that at least she had a daddy and ran off to her room. It was a horrible thing to say, and that's not how I raised my daughter. But I barely even had time to process it because the shouting caused Dewey to start crying. Harley, she left the table to go check up on him, and I just suspect to get away from Piper. I could only put out one fire at a time, so I started with Piper. I told her gently but firmly that this behavior is unacceptable, and when she seemed unreceptive, I asked her point blank if Roxie had ever taken her to therapy as promised, and Piper just scoffed and asked why her mother would do that, and I tried to explain what Roxie and I talked about. Well, but Piper simply played dumb. She kept insisting that Roxie would never make her do it, and you would not have thought from her tone that I was insulting her. It was going nowhere, and I could feel myself getting frustrated, so I told her to wait a while, and I went to check on Rosie and Dewey. Harley had a handle on things with Dewey, so that did not take long. Rosie was hurt, but she also understood from the previous talks that Piper's going through a tough adjustment and simply lashing out. It took far less time to calm her down than it did for the first time they fought. Altogether, I'm not sure I was away from the table for more than 30 minutes. But when I came back, Piper was gone. I tried to call her, but I got no response, thinking that she's gotten angry and called her mother to pick her up. So I called Roxie, and when Roxie said she hadn't heard from Piper since dropping her off, we started to worry. Roxie came over, and we both tried calling Piper. Her phone was off, and I asked if Harley would mind looking after Dewey while we tried to sort things out. Roxie and I drove around all night looking for our daughter. See, Roxie knew of a few places Piper likes to hang out with friends. We checked all of them. After hours of turning up empty, we agreed to get the police involved. Well, guys, that was 3 days ago, and Roxie and I have been out day after day looking. Yeah, it's a big city, but we're running out of ideas. None of her friends have heard from her, and she hasn't been to school. The police pulled her phone records, but it doesn't seem like it's even been turned on since she up and disappeared. I can't remember the last time I was this scared since losing Roxie. It feels just like yesterday I found out I had a second daughter. I'm worried now that I may have already lost her. I'll update you guys if I hear anything. Final update. About a week ago into Piper's disappearance, Roxie and I were getting absolutely desperate. I feel horrible that the thought even crossed our minds, but we've been searching parks and creeks. We were terrified we would find a body instead of our daughter. But by that point, we just wanted to find anything. While searching around the creek, I get a call from Harley. She asked if I was with Roxie, and I said yes, and she told me not to react, but that Piper had shown up at our home. She told me that I need to make an excuse to come home and that I need to not sound too suspicious. I couldn't imagine what was going on, but I did as I was told. Roxie and I have taken separate cars that day, so I told her that Dewey had a fever, and I need to rush home. When I got there, Piper was sitting in our dining room sobbing. She said that she was ready to tell me the truth, and I don't know if anything that's happened in the past few weeks I've known, her could have possibly prepared me for it. Apparently, my entire relationship with Piper was built on a lie. Piper never told Roxie that she wanted to meet me. She was always fine without a dad. Roxie had never actually told her why we broke up or why I wasn't in her life. She just lied that I'd ran out on them while Piper was little. So, Roxie lied to me too. It wasn't true that she had not seen many men since we fell out. She'd apparently been in some terrible relationships, and enough that her own daughter was starting to worry about her. And one day, Piper asked her mom if she had ever been in a relationship and actually made her happy. Turns out she had been, right up until I cheated on her. So, Roxie came up with the idea that we could reconnect, and she used Piper to do it. The original idea was supposed to be that getting to know Piper would drive my curiosity about Roxie. Of course, I've been so distracted by adjusting to a new daughter that the thought barely crossed my mind. And that particular oversight in Roxie's plan did not make her very happy. So when I invited Piper to meet my family, Roxie decided to break us apart. She told Piper to be disruptive and cause a fight. She threatened to take her phone away if she did not, and Piper said that she liked our family and did not want to go through with it. Apparently, she practically had to force herself to break Rose's dollhouse, which, looking back, explains why she still looks so guilty after I told her everything. Luring me away from Rose's softball game was also Roxie's idea. The night Piper disappeared, she was already feeling as if things have gone too far, and she had no idea that Roxie had thrown her under the bus during our talk. She didn't realize it until I mentioned Roxie sending her to therapy. Between that and feeling like she'd made Dewey cry, Piper decided to text her mom while I was in the other room to say that she could not do it anymore. In the time I've been talking to Rose, Roxie had come to pick Piper up. She took Piper's phone and dropped her off at her ex-boyfriend's house. He wasn't listed there since he was simply squatting in a home that Roxie has been unable to sell. It made for the perfect place to hide somebody if you don't want them to be found. Roxie told Piper not to leave the house or let anyone know where she was. Piper didn't know that Roxie was planning a fake disappearance, but she was too scared and confused not to do what she was told. She did not get into the details, but apparently staying with the ex got uncomfortable enough that Piper felt she could not stay anymore. Without a phone to call anyone, she decided to just make her way to my place. I was horrified by everything that I was hearing. I needed a moment to process it all. So I asked if she'd be okay for a moment while I talked things over with Harley. So, we could make a joint discussion about what to do next, and we came up with a plan. First, I made sure Piper knew that no one and none of what happened was her fault. I told her that I may have an idea how to fix things, but only if she agreed. And I let her know that if she did agree, there was a chance she might wind up living with me for a bit. For that to happen, I needed her to promise that she would continue to be the incredible young woman that I'd met the first time we had lunch together. She gave me her word that she would, so we went forward with the plan. The first thing I did was to download an app that lets you add a second number to your phone. I also downloaded a call recorder, and I just let Piper call Roxie from the second number. Having taken Piper's phone away, Roxie naturally was surprised to hear from her, and her surprise made it fairly easy for Piper to gather and to repeat at least some of what had happened, including the fact that she was supposed to be squatting with Roxie's ex. Once the call recorded had caught enough that it seemed it was a solid case, Piper hung up the phone without telling Roxie her whereabouts. Then we called the cops to relay to them what happened. Closing a missing persons case is not as simple as checking off the child's found, so they do an interview, and Piper learns what happened. We made sure in the process that they heard the full recording of Roxie's confession. Filing a police report, especially in regard to something so serious, is no small matter. Well, unless she finds someone to post her bail, Roxie is not stepping foot outside of a county jail until she gets a court date. After that, the penalty in our state could be as long as 6 months. In the meantime, I've agreed to care for Piper. There are some formalities that we'll need to undergo, including an appearance before a judge, and likely a conversation with CPS. If Roxie is convicted, I intend to file for sole custody. Piper's mixed feelings about this, not wanting a full separation from the woman who raised her. So, she's convinced me to compromise a bit, and I did. If granted custody, I'm willing to allow supervised visits. I'm not thrilled that this is the way things worked out. I was still adjusting to a new baby just weeks ago. Adding a new teenager on top of that was already quite a lot. Now there's a complicated legal side of things that I have no prior experience with. I'm not that kind of social worker. I've had to study this side of things, but living them is entirely different. Despite the many disruptions to our home, however, I'm feeling optimistic enough about the future to say this ought to be my final update. There will be hurdles, but I have faith everything will turn out okay, especially now that I get to spend some time with the real Piper, free of her mother's influence. I can't wait to get to know the truth. Honest version of the wonderful young woman who has ventured into my life. We have a lot of catching up to do. So I feel really bad for Piper. She was tossed up into this mess from her mom Roxie, and I do want to know what you guys think about today's story. It had a lot of emotions involved with it, and there were some ups and downs, so let's talk about it down below in the comment section. Yeah, I don't know. If I was in OP's position, this would be a really hard decision, but at the end of the day, it looks like Roxie's going to see some time behind jail cells. She confesses to everything that she did, and luckily OP was able to get it recorded. Guys, my name's Mr. Reddito, and if you guys do enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button. Only about 20% of the viewers are actively subscribed to the channel, and it does support it a lot. Thank you for that, guys. I hope this was an entertaining story for you, and if you want more, I'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day, and remember, of course, it's cool to be kind. See ya.